I've known Christoph, I think it's, well, since I joined TraceLink back in 2017, because you were quite involved in FMD. Now you've gone around the globe. DSCSA is a big focus of yours now. Maybe tell the audience what your background is and what you're going to talk about today.
Yes, so my name is Christoph Krajabel. I'm Swiss, based in the UK. And a long, long time ago, I was the serialization lead at AstraZeneca. And that was before there were actually any global regulations, even before Turkey. AstraZeneca decided to serialize, and then it so happened that with regulations coming along, being sort of emerging AstraZeneca, because we did have a lot of knowledge at the time, practical experience, how to do things, but even more of how not to do things. We ended up playing quite a role in the helping to shape the European approach. So I've been involved for many years in the European Medicines Verification System. One of the guilty parties you can blame for how the thing is working or not working. Anyway, moving on swiftly. So nowadays I'm part of, well, so I used to be, well, I'm Swiss, used to be British, then became part, our company became part of EPCIS, the American company. Now I'm Dane because we got acquired by NNIT, a Danish company, so a life sciences company. But at the heart of it, EPCIS, we are a leading serialization traceability life science consultancy. We do a lot of work around still serialization. It's not the end of the story, but of course it's grown, it's affected other areas, and so there's things always, monitoring things. So one of the questions earlier or just before was how to keep on top of all of this. So little plug, we have a regulatory radar service you can subscribe to, so you get updates on all the serializations out there emerging. Not just the what is it, but also what does it mean? How do you prepare? And because one of the challenges is, you've mentioned about, Lars mentioned about talking to the, having the regulatory team, but of course, they tend to wait till the regulation is signed into law, and in some countries, many countries, that's far too late to get ready, right? So you need to sort of like act on rumors. You need to take an intelligent interpretation.
Do you have an example of a country that's like that?
Where do I start? I mean, Russia used to be wonderful because we went on Christmas holiday. Russia, Christmas holiday happened. It happens later. So President Putin was busy signing off decrees, and you'd wake up, so Boxing Day, just sneaking out and not having a look at the email really. But oh shit. Yeah. So anyway, never mind. So and I think. But one of the other things is also alerts. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm quickly, we'll talk about the US, and so we start in Europe, of course, right?
Yeah. In fact, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
You said you collaborated quite closely with EMVO. What happened on February 10th, 2019, as people started scanning? Was there panic in the house when they saw alerts coming in?
No. I went around all the pharmacies in my little local town. There were 4 pharmacies, and scared the pharmacists because I asked them, so how do you scan this morning? And they were like, what? And in one of the big chains, somebody said, oh, I think we're going to get trained. I've heard about this. And of course, I mean, this was the UK, but never mind. That's another story. So. But the European system, just a really quick, I don't want to explain it in any detail, but if you look at the legislation, the whole reason why the European system was established was to create alerts. That's the whole point of it, because it's all about identifying potential counterfeit medicines in the supply chain. So you've got it written into the law that the system needs to be able to create an alert when there's a mismatch between the data and the physical pack being presented in the pharmacy. And then, as the law also says, and then, there's additional sort of you've got the law, and then you've got additional sort of interpretations, questions and answers from the commissions that sort of clarify, what is actually meant in reality. There's something about, you need to immediately investigate. So, there's an urgency to this. And, that goes back to the manufacturer often. Now, what's happened? It all was very quiet in 2019, and then it started ramping up because not all the stakeholders were connected, and it took a long time. But by today, you've got 1,400 companies, so in European terms, OBPs, onboarding partners, connected to the system. It's about 350,000 products, so 350,000 GTINs for which serial data is uploaded in real time constantly. You've got at the end, at the dispensing points, you've got about 115,000 pharmacies and about 7,000 hospitals and other organizations right across the continent linked up. And they're scanning, way above, I think it's about 97% of packs or whatever now get scanned. There's still some markets that are lagging behind. We're going to see a very interesting spike with Italy and Greece next February 19th, but again, let's not go there. But what you see then is you see a lot of alerts being generated, and the alert rates, they were sort of like scary, it's up to 0.3%. I mean, target was then set, okay, what's acceptable? So 0.05%, so 1 in 2,000. That's what is deemed to be an acceptable rate. And as you can see, we're getting there, but, unfortunately, the trend, has sort of been buckling. And what you see, you seem to be stabilizing at a rate of still at, 0.08%, so closer to 0.1%. You're talking about 1 in 1,000 packs is still generating alert. And that is 5.5 years after the system got stood up, and the processes are really well established by now, but it still is a challenge. You've got some markets which have been very disciplined, and I'll get to that when we come to the US afterwards, where the alert rates are a lot lower now. But right across the continent, they're still high. And so if you say you've got an alert rate, so 1 in 1,000 packs is generating an alert, and if you look at just do a really rough calculation, number of pharmacies, number of scans, there's multiple alerts generated in every pharmacy every week still, right? In some markets, if you go to Denmark or Sweden or Finland, they'll be far lower, but in other markets, they will be higher. So, that is still not quite where we should be 5.5 years after go live. And it's after a lot of work. So what is that? What is causing these alerts? And these are just some of these many alert categories. And some of the root causes, those are the main ones. And you've got sort of end users, so that's pharmacists, hospitals, and then you've got also the OBPs, the manufacturers. What causes these? And then the last column I've just sort of added, which are the main ones these days, right? And you can see you've got sort of. And it is always a mismatch between the data in the system and the data on the physical pack that's being scanned. And then you can see things, some of the easy ones, very European typical. You've got some sort of scanner software misconfiguration where data gets translated, QWERTY keyboards, English keyboards, and then different keyboard layouts. So there's a mistranslation of letters that are scanned, so that you can address that in different ways. But if your batch is not uploaded for whatever reason, of course, the pack is scanned in the pharmacy, and you think, well, it's not in the system. So there's some obvious ones, but there's a lot of you can see, especially that second sort of row, the bulk of it is things happening in pharmacies at the end user, where things are just the scanning process is not really carried out properly, or there's a misconfiguration, and so on. And it can also be systems, the pharmacy systems that are then scanning, if there's some issue there. We've seen even in countries that have got a really good history, and Denmark, for example, there was a suddenly, they had a really nice low rate, and then there was because issues had been ironed out, and then there was a new version in a whole lot of hospitals. They got a new version of their software, and some old bugs had crept in again, and suddenly, the rate spiked again, and things like that. Now, the interesting thing is, and again, this is just Europe, so it doesn't translate into sort of US directly, but there's some things about systems. But I think, in general terms, again, it is relevant. So you've got the environment, the manufacturer at the top, and then you've got sort of the external, so that's the downstream partners in the supply chain. And you've got the classic, you've got the environment, the process, the equipment. And if you look at that, all of these things can cause some failure in the process. That means the scan fails. And if you look at them, the big ones are where we've got these sort of I've put sort of these explosions on there, the sort of call-outs, and you can see they are on the end user side generally, right? So that's interesting because that's actually outside of the control of the manufacturers, and yet it's the manufacturers who legally have to deal with that because the system is set up. A scan in the pharmacy fails because the pharmacist has done something wrong. That alert bounces up via the system to the manufacturer, and depending on the market, they've got to deal with that within 24 hours. Investigate, find out root cause, and then get back and confirm yes or no. And when the system is really fully up and running, the 24 hours is too long, because there's a pharmacist standing there and cannot dispense a pack, theoretically. Today, you've still got some sort of guidance in many markets that pharmacists can use their professional judgment, right? And so even if the system says no, they can look at the pack and, just where did we get it from and does it look okay, and dispense it anyway. So we're not there yet in Europe with enforcement either. But, that's one of the takeaways. It's taken a long time to get here, and it's still it's the manufacturer who actually, has to carry the weight of this, even if it's outside their control. And so what does that mean? It's if you're looking at your supply chain, your extended supply chain these days now, and when we're getting towards sort of, I guess, things like Mint and so on, the communication in the supply chain, the information flows, it's all of these points where scans happen, right? And all of these are potential causes of alerts and exceptions, right? So, I guess.
Well, I wanted to know
the US then.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
yeah.
All right. So many of you are familiar with EU alerts. They probably keep you awake at night. So maybe before we, it seems that you're kind of saying, all right, well, we had this experience in Europe, 5.5 years in, we're still not out of the woods. Let's translate to what might or might not happen on November 27th, 2024. So can you explain just a couple key differences between EU-FMD and the DSCSA? So in terms of systems and philosophy.
So the key difference is it's a different architecture, different approach, right? So one of them is in the US, the transactions follow the money. In Europe, it's the physical pack. So that's one important thing. The other difference is that in Europe, many, many different architectures were sort of looked at, including some models like in the US. In the end, Europe went for a sort of a centralized approach. You've got the national systems, but you've got the central hub where all the data goes up and then it's distributed to national centers and so on. And of course, in the US, that's completely different. You've not got such a central system. So it's a point of points. So what that means is for manufacturers and for end users in Europe, you only connect to one system, to one node. In the US, you've really got to build the connections to all your trading partners. So that is the integration challenge there is on a different level altogether.
So in FMD, you will receive an alert, something scanned, the data mismatch. There's not going to be an alert as such in the US. I mean, so maybe could you define alert versus exception? Maybe that's the...
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's the same thing. It's a mismatch between the physical data, the physical product and the information, right? If there's a mismatch, then in the digitalized, serialized supply chain, the process has to stop and you've got to sort it out before you can move on again to the next step. Now, the US approach has a number of benefits in a way, because in Europe, the way you've got, in theory, no check until the pharmacy, the point of dispense in the end, means that could be the first time you notice it. In reality, of course, that's what part of the learning has been. If you ship, your 3PL should really scan on receipt just to make sure that they can confirm the upload looks okay from their side as well, and the distribution to the system has happened. But in the US, you've got earlier points when you could actually begin to notice something's gone wrong and address the challenges. So there's benefit in that, okay, and also operating at an aggregation level, not as you can see some of the benefits there in keeping the data volumes potentially, reduced, or the integration with your local systems enhanced.
So, Christoph, you've worked with companies on both sides of the Atlantic. What are you hearing as some concerns? I mean, from TraceLink, we hear, all right, unlike FMD, the shipments need to be scanned every step of the way from manufacturer all the way down to dispensation. But as you said, aggregation helps, so I don't have to scan each of the 1,000 packs. I can just scan one number. What are some of the operational challenges that presents, or maybe operational opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it's systems and implementation, really. And, the big concern that we have, working right across the supply chain with many partners, manufacturers, but also wholesalers. And we're working with, we've got some big implementation projects with dispensers. It's really that none of them are ready, right? We've seen on the manufacturer side, we'd say, if we want to be generous, about sort of 80% are probably really ready by now. But meaning ready is just being really consistently able to send physical product and information nicely, in parallel, routinely, without anything going wrong. That is challenging, and that's not been mastered.
Christoph, you were talking about in the EU, you get an alert if there's these stabilization periods, which don't really have a single definition, but basically use your best judgment and you can dispense if things seem all right. And you said 24 hours, some countries more. What is the rule in the US?
Now that's where it gets interesting, right? So in the US, for a start, you've already had this enforcement holiday because, we're in 2024, we were supposed to have reached the final point last November, but FDA has given another year. And there's been a great reluctance, of course, because giving more time, there's always a risk that people take the foot off the pedal. And anecdotal evidence is that, of course, that's what happened, right? So, in a way, and if one of the slides I showed where you had the green markets, the markets where they're really out of the stabilization period, you're now in full modus operandi. That's actually what's happened there. Those markets have been quite strict on enforcing compliance, on following up, also providing support and help. And they have managed to drive down their alert rates in those markets. But it's taken the focus, it's taken the attention, and it's also taken this clear statement. Okay, the safety net, this whatever you want to call it, stabilization period or whatever, that's going to go away now, right? So you're going to have a hard landing if you're not doing it properly, and that provides wonderful encouragement, I think, and that is to some extent lacking in the US.
Well, in fact, I was going to ask you. So we have an NMVS, which clearly says, okay, there were 100,000 alerts yesterday. What do we have in the US to report, for example, to the FDA?
So, because you've got this distributed system, so it's actually quite hard as well to get insights into where are you really. So talk about KPIs and so on. You couldn't produce these EMVO reports in the US, and I think just apart from all discussions about the architectures and so on, that is something that would be useful to have that, okay? And then, of course, you've got, so you've then got other, so you've got this exemption for the small dispensers.
Well, in fact, yes,
Yeah.
there's an exemption there.
Yeah.
So I guess you almost don't know whether your trading partner has an exemption or
So
not.
the small dispensers, yes, of
Yeah.
course. So those are pharmacists.
That's the end of the line, right?
End of the line, yes. Pharmacists with fewer than a maximum of 25 pharmacists. So in European terms, they're not small, right? They're, depending on which market you go to, they're wow, yeah. But still, so you've got them. But I think those are at the end of the line in a way. So you've got these. You've then got these waivers, exemptions, and exceptions that stakeholders need to apply for, and then they may get granted sort of an exemption, so they can continue supplying their T3s rather than the T2s and so on. But you then get into the point where you're saying, okay, so which trading partner has an exemption? Where are they? And then you get into a situation which is actually, it reminds me of, in Europe, we have something called the designated wholesaler. Mm-hmm. So, again, sorry for going to Europe, but it's a relevant, it's very relevant actually, of a challenge that applies exactly in the same way. Because, of course, the law in Europe also says if you receive your product from the manufacturer or the manufacturer's designated wholesaler, which is a 3PL, right, then you do not need to carry out inbound checks because you're receiving it from a trusted party. But if it's from somebody who is not within that guilted circle, you do need to carry out inbound scans and checks. So how do you downstream as a wholesaler in the supply chain know is the party I'm receiving it from, the physical shipment from, is that a designated wholesaler for this product, for this manufacturer in this country or not? And so the European system actually has got in, as part of the master data, this sort of designated wholesaler flag. So that gets propagated, that gets updated by the manufacturer. They need to sort of look at their contract, say, okay, in this country, this is a 3PL who is part of, I've got a contract with them for distribution of my products. So therefore, they are a designated wholesaler for me in that market for those products. And then that information gets propagated through the system. So in the national systems, you can look that up. So a wholesaler can just carry out the check and say, okay, for these inbound shipments, I do need to scan. For those, I don't, because I've received them from a designated wholesaler. Now, there's no such system in the US.
Yeah, there's no master list, is there?
No. So again, it's sort of it's a communication between trading partners. But
So I see my colleague Joel.
Yeah, I think in the US it's even more complicated, right? Because it's not just a trade partner that's exempt. It's per GTIN, per partner for a designated time frame.
Yep.
So you have to track that. So then you ask yourself, how does anybody know what's exempt? How are you going to track that through the industry when you're exchanging the data? So it's a little bit more complicated.
No, absolutely. I mean, the interoperability goal really begins to fall apart if you haven't got that clarity. Mm-hmm. So it's that's with the best will in the world, granting such exemptions, in a way, you can see why it might make sense. But on the other hand, it really introduces, injects a lot of uncertainty and challenges into the system.
So what is the FDA telling? Okay, the FDA will grant these time-bound, they're called WEEs, W-E-E, waivers, exemptions, and exceptions. What does the FDA advise if they're not publishing a list? Nobody's publishing a list. What are trading partners supposed to do? Attach a little Post-it note to
talk to each other. Talk to each other.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And how can they talk to each other, Christoph?
Yeah. Well, so I think you're pushing me towards my concluding statements, because actually, that's one of the things. So this integrated, interoperable supply chain, getting your trading partners connected closely, that's becoming so important. That's without that, things are just going to fall apart. So, I think, I've been thinking the last couple of days, that's why, this Opus Mint development is exciting, because you actually do see a conduit for some of that information, for some of those information flows. And so that's one thing. But, I guess the other thing is that it always also depends on your data, right? If your data's not right, it's always garbage in, garbage out, and, things fall down.
So I know you don't have a crystal ball, but we have seen what happened in Europe on, in 2019. Do we think the same sort of Armageddon is going to happen in the U.S.? Sorry to be so drastic about that, but because we don't have a central system that can say, oh, there's an alert. We have, oh, I got product without data. Oh, I got data without product. Oh, there's a mismatch here. There's so many different things that can happen in the U.S. Do you think it's going to be, is November 28th, the day after, going to be a very unhappy Thanksgiving for Americans?
Yeah, it's such a shame I left my crystal ball, Alan.
I know.
Sorry, yes.
We asked you to bring it.
Yes. It went all cloudy, yes. I mean, there's stormy seas ahead, let's put it that way, I think. It's just, having lived through this undertaking, and even with, I have to emphasize the European approach and the European system. It's really simple, actually. It really is. The American approach is a lot, it's for good reasons. The two supply chains are structured differently. The market operates in a different way. So I'm not saying well, you should have put in a US MVO. Not at all. But it's just, you can see there are differences, but there are also similarities. The similarities are all about the correct data in the correct place, sent at the correct time and received well and processed and so on. And if trading partners are not ready to do that consistently, then there's pain. There's going to be pain.
So would you, I think the message has been, okay, well, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah.
I translate into grams and kilograms. But the idea would be, all right, get your data in order, but okay, let's say the unthinkable or unwantable happens, Christoph. Would you advise the folks here to, I don't know, maybe already contact trading partners in the just kind of do like a fire drill? Or what would you advise people who might say, okay, we know this tidal wave is coming, but thank you. What should we do about it?
Well, let's not call it a fire drill, but let's call it more sort of good, sound preparation work. This is, in the end, this is project work, right? Mm-hmm. You always hope for the best, plan for the worst, and part of that is also testing. But I think the other thing is what companies would be well advised to do is look at their supply chain, look at their trading partners, and have a quite a hard, close look at their capabilities. And what you will need to do is, you need to identify which are the third parties you use, how important, how integral are they to your supply chain, and then you look at their capabilities. Can they fulfill their obligations that are legally, on them, but also, they will need to fulfill duties that are your legal obligation, but they need to discharge those on your behalf, and really need to have a hard look at them. And then what you will come out of, we do that exercise for companies. We call it the supply chain health check, and what comes out of that is a very clear grid. You've got some of the partners that are absolutely strategic and are capable. Good. You've got some that are strategic, but you've got some shortcomings. That's absolutely where you need to start focusing your attention. And then you've got others that are strategic and not capable in that corner. And that is, how quickly can you get out? And what is your exit strategy?